The boardroom was silent enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Is Revenge Room. If this is the first time you are seeing our video, kindly like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. I had spent 347 days building that deal. Every late night, every client dinner, every weekend call, all of it leading to one $40 million contract. Then Ryan Caldwell stepped to the screen and started presenting it as his own. He used my words. He showed my numbers. He described the client relationship I had spent over a year building. The board nodded like he had performed some kind of miracle. I waited for my name on the next slide. It didn't come. I leaned forward. Actually, I'd like to add. Ryan turned. Let's stay on track, Emily. Not harshly. Just firmly enough to close a door in my face in front of every senior leader in the company. 12 minutes later, back at my desk, the email arrived. Subject line, reassignment notice, effective immediately. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands didn't shake. My stomach didn't drop. Something colder and quieter moved through me instead. This was not a mistake. He had planned every single step of this. The access, the meetings, the final slide, all of it deliberate. All of it calculated. And now I understood exactly how far back the planning had gone. 3 months earlier, I thought I was the luckiest employee in the building. Ryan had pulled me aside after a strategy session and told me I was the most capable deal manager he had ever worked with. He said it in front of 2 directors. I actually felt my face go warm. 12 years of careful, honest work, and finally someone at the top was paying attention. That same week, he asked for access to my client communications. Just for executive visibility, he said. The board loves seeing how deals develop. You know how leadership gets. I thought that was completely reasonable. It felt like being invited into an inner circle. I gave him full access to my email thread with the client. I gave him my proposal drafts. I shared my personal notes on the client's concerns, small details gathered over months of careful relationship building. I handed him the entire picture. He thanked me warmly and told me to keep doing what I was doing. I walked back to my desk feeling genuinely good about where things were heading. I had no idea I had just handed a thief the key to a house I had spent over a year building from nothing. That was my first mistake. And it cost me more than I ever imagined it would. The changes were so small at first that I almost missed them. It started with meetings. I would show up prepared for a client call and find that the real conversation had already happened somewhere else. Decisions had been made. Directions had already shifted. I was catching up instead of leading. When I mentioned it to Ryan, he smiled easily. You're too valuable to waste on routine check-in calls, he said. Let me handle the client-facing side for now. It sounded like a compliment. I accepted it as one. But then the documents he sent for my review started coming back already half-finished. My edits disappeared in the next version. My language was replaced. The core strategy underneath, which was entirely what I had built, remained. But my voice was slowly being erased from the surface of it. I started to feel like a ghost in my own project. I mentioned it once, casually, to a colleague named Priya. She gave me a strange look and said, I thought Ryan was the lead on this deal. I laughed it off. But I didn't sleep well that night. The feeling I had been pushing down for weeks had a name now. And I was getting very close to admitting what it was. I was walking back from the kitchen one Tuesday afternoon when I passed conference room C. The blinds were half open. I could see Ryan standing at the head of the table. Sitting across from him were 2 people I recognized immediately, Marcus Webb, head of procurement at our client's company, and his deputy. My clients. In a meeting I knew nothing about. Ryan was talking, gesturing toward the screen. I could see my slides through the glass. My color scheme, my structure, my layout. And I could see him mouthing phrases I had written myself. He was pitching my deal. Alone. Without telling me. I stopped walking. His eyes flicked toward the glass. Our eyes met for 1 second. No embarrassment, no guilt, just a quick, cold calculation. Then he walked to the door and closed it. Not a wave. Not a nod. Just a closed door in my face. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. The quiet hum of the building felt louder than usual. Doubt had been living in the back of my mind for weeks. But something shifted in that corridor. Doubt stepped aside and let something harder and more useful take its place. I understood now. This wasn't carelessness. This was a plan. I went back to my desk and opened the project management system out of habit. For 14 months, I had been listed as the primary owner of the contract file. I had created it, named it, organized every document inside it. The system was practically shaped around my workflow. The screen loaded. Access denied. I clicked again. Same message. I tried the client communication folder. Denied. I tried the proposal archive. Denied. I tried my own working drafts, saved under my personal project tag. Denied. In the space of one afternoon, I had been locked out of everything that had my name on it from the beginning. I sat very still. Your brain tries to explain things away when the truth is too uncomfortable. Maybe a system update. Maybe a permissions error. Maybe an honest mistake. I knew none of those were true. I called IT support anyway. The technician checked my profile and went quiet for a beat too long. Your access was removed by a senior administrator, he said carefully. I thanked him and ended the call. My hands were completely steady when I put the phone down. That surprised me. But I understood, in that moment, that my body already knew what my mind was still processing. This was deliberate. And it had already been going on longer than I realized. Her name was Amara. We weren't close friends, but we ate lunch together sometimes. She was the kind of person who noticed what others walked past. She stopped by my desk the next morning with her coffee and a careful look on her face. I probably shouldn't be saying this, she started. I told her to say it anyway. She sat down and lowered her voice. She had been helping the contracts team format the final submission the previous evening, standard admin work she did often. Something had caught her eye. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. The document was titled Fortis Group Partnership Agreement, Final Submission. 42 pages. I could see the header, the clause numbering, the exact formatting template I had built 14 months ago. On the cover page, under lead negotiator, was one name. Ryan Caldwell. I scrolled through the screenshot slowly. My name did not appear once. Not in the authorship line. Not in the acknowledgements. Not anywhere. I had been removed so completely that anyone reading it would have no reason to know I had ever existed. Amara watched my face. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I handed her phone back. Thank you, I told her. I meant it more than she knew. Because what she had just shown me wasn't the end of this story. It was the beginning of the next chapter. I requested a meeting with Ryan that same afternoon. I kept my tone even, no urgency, no edge. Just a simple check-in. He replied within minutes and said he had 20 minutes free at 4 o'clock. I went in calm. Sat down. Kept my voice level. I noticed my name isn't on the final contract document, I said. I wanted to understand how that decision was made. Ryan leaned back. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who had already rehearsed this conversation. Emily, he said, you've been an incredible contributor. Nobody is disputing that. I waited. But at the executive level, the board and the client need to see consistent senior leadership. It's about visibility. About who the client trusts to carry the relationship forward. They trust me, I said. I built that relationship. He smiled the way people smile when they have already decided the conversation is over. You're part of a team, he said. Leadership means knowing when to step back. That was the moment I understood completely. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He had made a deliberate choice and expected me to accept it with a polite nod. I thanked him and left. And on the walk back to my desk, the plan I had been forming quietly in the back of my mind hardened into something real. 2 days later, Ryan sent me an email at 7 in the evening. He needed the complete negotiation history, every version of the proposal, every client exchange, and the internal risk notes from the early stages of the deal. He called it a handoff package for executive records. I read it 3 times. The smart move would have been to refuse. Or to copy HR and ask for written clarification first. But I understood how that would look. Refusing a direct VP request without documented cause makes you the difficult employee. Difficult employees don't get the benefit of the doubt when things unravel later. So I sent it. I compiled everything into a folder and replied with a short, professional confirmation. And I kept a full copy of everything. Every file, every email, every note, time-stamped and stored somewhere he had no access to. Because even as I handed him the last piece he needed, I was already thinking 2 steps ahead. He thought he was closing a door. What he didn't realize was that the moment he made that request in writing, with his name, his title, his email address, he had handed me something far more valuable than any proposal. He had handed me a paper trail. I had given him the materials. He had given me the evidence. The boardroom presentation ended at 9:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock as the applause started. 12 people clapping for a man who had spent 14 months watching someone else work, and then taken a bow at the finish line. I gathered my things and walked out. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. I had been invisible in that room for weeks already. The reassignment email had simply made it official. I rode the elevator down alone. The doors were mirrored inside, and I caught a glimpse of myself as the numbers counted down. I looked tired. I looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long. But I also noticed something else. My jaw was set. My eyes were steady. No tears, no trembling. Just someone who had watched their best work handed to another person in front of the entire leadership team, and was still standing. I thought about 12 years of careful, honest work. Every decision I had made in the belief that good work, done quietly and well, would eventually be seen. The elevator opened. I walked out into the morning. And I made a decision. Not to fall apart. Not to walk away. To fight carefully, precisely, and with everything I had built. I didn't go home to cry. I went home to work. I sat at my kitchen table with my personal laptop and a very clear head. I had spent the elevator ride building a list in my mind, and by the time I got home, that list had become a plan. I created a folder on my desktop and named it simply, Proof. Not revenge. Not a complaint. Just proof, cold, organized, dated proof of what I had built and exactly when I had built it. I understood something in that moment. Anger is a tool, but only when directed carefully. The people who lose in situations like mine usually act from emotion. They fire off accusatory emails, make scenes, let everyone see how upset they are. Those people get labeled unstable. Their complaints get quietly buried. I had no intention of being that person. What I intended to be was precise. Over the next several hours, I organized years of documents. Emails from the earliest Fortis Group conversations. Proposal drafts with my name in the metadata. Strategy notes I had written and shared with Ryan directly. I was not building a complaint. I was building a case. And when the time came to present it, I would do so with the same calm that had carried me out of that boardroom without a single word of protest. The first thing I found when I sat down with those files was that the story they told was impossible to argue with. Computers do not lie about dates. Every document carried metadata, the date it was created, the date it was last modified, and the username attached to each action. Every email carried a timestamp and a sender address. These were not things Ryan could alter retroactively. They were baked into the digital record. The earliest Fortis Group proposal draft was dated 16 months ago. My name was on it. My email had sent it internally for review. The client's first reply had come to my inbox. I went through file after file. Every strategy memo, written by me. Every risk analysis, authored by me. Every version of the proposal, going back to a rough outline I had emailed to myself on a Sunday afternoon. Ryan's name appeared in the record too. But not as a creator. As a recipient. Someone who had been copied, forwarded, given access, but had never built a single original thing himself. I worked through the night constructing a clean timeline. Each document listed by date, by author, by the chain of communication surrounding it. By 3 a.m, the folder was no longer just a collection of files. It was a complete, documented account of exactly what had happened. And there was not a single gap in it. I started pulling older project archives, deals from 2 years before Fortis Group. What I found made me set down my coffee. There was a pattern. Subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But once you noticed it, it was everywhere. A junior analyst named Kofi had spent 7 months building a pricing model for a supply chain deal in 2022. The deal closed. The internal announcement credited Ryan's team. Kofi's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. His fingerprints were all over the earliest drafts. A project coordinator named Steph had written the operational framework for a partnership deal in early 2023. The final version, submitted under Ryan's name, was nearly word for word her original. She left the company 4 months after the deal closed. There was a late 2023 deal where a full competitive analysis had been built by a mid-level associate who was quietly moved to a different department right before the board presentation. Ryan hadn't done this once. He had built a system. A deliberate system for absorbing other people's work, removing their names, and presenting the results as his own. Each victim had been handled cleanly, reassigned, overlooked, quietly moved on. I was not his first. But I was determined, with everything in me, to be his last. His name was Jake Osei. He was 26, visibly uncomfortable, and standing at the edge of my desk one morning while most of the office was still filing in. He sat down quickly, glanced over his shoulder, and leaned forward with his hands clasped. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." He told me that 6 weeks earlier, Ryan had called him into his office. Ryan explained that the deal was entering its final phase and the team needed to present a unified front. Any work Jake had contributed should be described as collaborative output, not individual. Jake had assumed that was standard corporate language at first. Then Ryan gave a specific instruction. If anyone asked about the proposal's origins, Jake was to say the strategy had been developed by the executive team. Jake looked at me with an expression sitting somewhere between guilt and relief. "I should have spoken up earlier," he said quietly. "But he's the VP." I didn't think anyone would believe me. I told him what he was doing right now took more courage than most people in the building had shown. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "There's more you need to see." He reached for his laptop. And what he showed me next changed the nature of everything I thought I was dealing with. Jake turned his laptop screen toward me. It was a version of the Fortis Group contract I had never seen before. Not the version I had built. A modified version, and the modifications were concentrated in the risk clauses. I leaned forward and read carefully. The original risk framework I had designed spread liability across multiple parties in the event of a delivery failure. That balance was deliberate. I had negotiated those terms carefully with the client's legal team over several weeks. In this modified version, 3 separate clauses had been changed. The language now placed accountability most heavily on the originating analyst in the event of project failure. On the person who had built the strategy. On me. But the authorship field, the metadata footer identifying who had drafted the framework, still carried my name. Ryan hadn't bothered to change that part. Which meant that if anything went wrong, a contract version existed pointing directly at me as the architect of the risk structure, while the submitted version gave me no credit for the deal itself. He hadn't just stolen my work. He had turned it into a trap. If the deal succeeded, he would take the glory. If it collapsed, I would carry the wreckage. I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The picture was now complete. And it was worse than I had imagined. People describe turning points as dramatic moments, something cracks open and light floods in and you know exactly what to do. It wasn't like that. It was quieter. Colder. Like something settling into place after weeks of being off balance. I looked at that modified contract and felt a clarity I hadn't had in months. Not rage. Not panic. Something closer to complete understanding. Until that moment, this had been about unfairness. Credit stolen, recognition withheld. Those things were real. But they were survivable. You move to another company. You rebuild. You carry on. This was different. Ryan had made a deliberate calculation, let her build it, take the reward, and if anything breaks, make sure the wreckage lands on her. He hadn't just cut me out of the deal. He had engineered a situation where my name was attached to everything that could fail, and absent from everything that would be celebrated. I looked at Jake. He was watching me carefully. "Thank you," I told him. He nodded. "What are you going to do?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm going to let the truth speak," I said quietly. "I just need to make sure it speaks in the right room, to the right people, at the right time." He didn't look entirely certain. But he held my gaze. And that was enough. The hardest part of what came next was acting normal. I went back to my desk every morning. I answered emails. I attended the meetings I was still invited to, fewer every week. I nodded at the right moments. I said the right things. I did not confront Ryan again. I did not whisper to colleagues. I showed nothing. This required more effort than I expected. There is something deeply uncomfortable about sharing a building with someone who has deliberately set out to harm you and choosing not to react. Every time Ryan addressed the floor in a meeting, I had to remind myself why silence was the strategy. The moment I reacted, I became the story. Once I became the story, everything else became noise. So I stayed quiet and I kept building. I organized the proof folder with the precision of someone preparing a legal brief. Every document in a labeled subfolder. Every email saved as a PDF with the full header intact. The modified contract, preserved. Jake's written statement, signed and dated. I built a timeline from the very first email I had sent to the Fortis Group client all the way through to the boardroom presentation. 16 months of a story, told entirely in dates and documents. When it was finished, I read through the whole thing once. It was airtight. And I was ready. I wrote the email on a Wednesday evening and rewrote it 4 times before sending it. Not because the facts were unclear. The facts were solid. I rewrote it because tone matters more than most people realize. The wrong tone, too emotional, too accusatory, turns a strong case into a grievance. And grievances get managed. Cases get investigated. I wanted this investigated. The final version was addressed to the head of compliance and the director of internal audit. Compliance for policy violations. Audit for financial irregularities. Ryan's actions crossed both lines. The email was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph identified the deal, the timeline, and my role in it. The second described the specific discrepancies, the authorship records, the modified contract clauses, the reassignment, the pattern across previous deals. The third said I had supporting documentation ready and that I was raising this under the company's internal reporting policy. No accusations. No emotional language. No words like theft or fraud. Just facts, organized chronologically, with a clear offer to provide evidence. I attached nothing to that first email. I wanted them to ask for it. I pressed send at 8:43 in the evening. Then I closed my laptop, made dinner, and went to bed. The truth was now in the right room. All it needed was time. 3 days passed with nothing. No reply from compliance. No reply from audit. No meeting request, no acknowledgement, no sign that my email had landed anywhere useful. Ryan, meanwhile, was having an excellent week. He appeared on the internal newsletter as the executive leading the Fortis Group partnership. A short profile piece, a photograph, a quote about vision and long-term relationships. People sent congratulations through the messaging platform. Someone posted a celebratory comment and 14 people liked it. I read it all and felt a strange, deliberate calm. Doubt came. It always does when you take a risk and wait in silence. The voice asking whether you miscalculated. Whether the email went to spam. Whether compliance was already closer to Ryan than you assumed. Whether the company would simply protect him because protecting him was easier. I let the doubt visit. I didn't invite it to stay. Because I had thought this through carefully. Internal audit had a legal obligation to follow up on any documented complaint involving financial contracts. That wasn't a matter of preference or loyalty. That was policy. And policy, unlike people, doesn't have favorites. I refilled my coffee. Went back to my desk. And waited with the patience of someone who understood that the most powerful moves often look, from the outside, like absolutely nothing at all. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning, and I almost missed it. 2 members of the internal audit team appeared on the main floor. They didn't announce themselves. They walked in with laptops and settled into a small meeting room off the main corridor, the kind of room nobody usually used because it had no windows. They stayed for most of the morning. Ryan had a standing team meeting at 10. He walked in the same as always, jacket sharp, coffee in hand. But about 20 minutes in, he stepped out and stood in the hallway longer than usual. I watched from across the floor. He was looking toward the small meeting room. His jaw was set in a way I hadn't seen before. Then he went back inside. That afternoon, an assistant near the leadership corridor mentioned to Priya that Ryan had cancelled 2 afternoon calls without explanation. Priya mentioned it to me without thinking much of it. I thought a great deal of it. Over the next 2 days, audit appeared twice more. Brief, quiet, no drama. But the questions being asked in various meetings began shifting in ways that people around me were starting to notice and find strange. The foundation was moving beneath Ryan's feet. He could feel something happening. He just didn't know yet that he was already too late to stop it. He called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon and closed the door before he even sat down. The surface confidence was still there. But underneath it something had changed. A tightness around his eyes. A careful stillness in the way he was holding himself, the posture of someone bracing without wanting to show it. He offered me co-credit on the Fortis Group deal. He framed it as generosity. He talked about recognizing contributions and ensuring the record reflected the collaborative nature of the work. He used phrases like shared ownership and acknowledged partnership. He said he had been thinking about this and wanted to make things right. Then he said, very carefully, that he hoped we could put any misunderstandings behind us and move forward together. I looked at him. Co-credit. On the deal I had built entirely by myself. In exchange for going silent. He was scared. That was the only reason a man like Ryan Caldwell would sit across from a junior employee and offer to share anything. Fear was the only currency that moved him now. I told him I appreciated the offer and would think about it. He looked relieved. He shouldn't have. I had no intention of accepting anything. But I needed him believing I might, because a man who thinks he has escaped a trap walks very differently than a man who knows he hasn't. And I needed him walking, relaxed and unsuspecting, right into what was coming. I left his office and walked straight to the bathroom at the end of the corridor. I stood at the sink and looked at my reflection honestly for a moment. I thought about what accepting his offer would actually mean. My name on the contract. Partial recognition. The worst of what he had done quietly buried. He would keep his position. Kofi, Steph, the associate from 2023, none of them would ever see any acknowledgement of what had been taken from them. And Ryan would continue building the same system, finding the next person, doing it all over again. Co-credit was not justice. It was silence with a ribbon on it. I had not spent weeks building a careful, documented case to accept a deal that left everything as broken as it had always been. I thought about something my mother used to say when I was a teenager and angry about something unfair: the truth doesn't need you to yell it. It just needs you to tell it to the right people, in the right way. I dried my hands. Straightened my jacket. Walked back to my desk. Opened my email. And sent internal audit the full documentation folder. Every file. Every timestamp. Every piece of the timeline. Jake's written statement. The modified contract version with my name in the altered risk clauses. All of it. Quietly. On a Thursday afternoon. While Ryan sat in his office, convinced he had handled the problem. The board approval meeting was scheduled for a Friday 2 weeks out. It was the final step in the Fortis Group process, the formal sign-off that would make the contract legally binding and release the first tranche of funds. Once approved, the deal was locked. Everything downstream would follow from that signature. Ryan moved fast. He pushed the meeting forward by 4 days, citing client scheduling pressures. That wasn't the real reason. Audit's presence in the building had rattled him and he was trying to get the deal signed before anything surfaced. He had one play left and he was running it hard. What he didn't know was that compliance had escalated my complaint to the board's audit subcommittee 3 days earlier. And the subcommittee had made a quiet decision. They would be in the room. Not to stop the meeting. Not to cause a scene. Simply to be present, with the documentation I had submitted, and to ask whatever questions they felt needed answering. Sometimes the most powerful thing in a room isn't a confrontation. It's a question asked at the right moment by people with the authority to demand a real answer. I sat at my desk that Thursday evening and thought about what was coming. Ryan was rushing toward a finish line that had moved without his knowing. For the first time in weeks, I slept easily and completely. I was not in the room when it happened. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I did not walk in and confront Ryan. I did not make a speech or deliver a dramatic moment. That is not how it works in real organizations, and I had known from the beginning that inserting myself dramatically into the moment would have undermined everything I had built. The truth didn't need me to perform it. It just needed to be in the right room. What 2 people told me afterward was this: the meeting began normally. Ryan was at the front. The board was seated. Then 2 members of the audit subcommittee asked to share something before the approval was finalized. They projected one document on the screen behind Ryan. My original proposal draft. Date created, 16 months earlier. Author, Emily Nwora. Then they showed the email chain, my messages to the client going back to the very beginning. My name, my address, my words, dated and timestamped in a sequence that told a complete story without needing a single word of narration. Ryan offered an explanation. His voice was controlled. Then they asked Jake to step in from the corridor. Jake confirmed everything. The room changed completely after that. The questions that followed were not polite. The questions came fast and Ryan's answers didn't hold. He said the strategy had been developed collaboratively. Audit showed the individual file timestamps. He said his role had been to guide the direction. The board asked him to describe, specifically, what he had contributed. He couldn't. He kept using collective language, the team, our approach, the process we built, and every time he did, the absence of a real answer became louder than anything he was saying. Then the modified contract version appeared on screen. The one with the shifted liability clauses and my name still listed as the framework author. The room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. The chair of the audit subcommittee asked one question: could Ryan explain why the authorship field had not been updated after the changes were made? Ryan said nothing for a moment. Then he started to speak. What came out was not an answer. It was circular and unclear, and every experienced person in that room understood exactly what that meant. The board asked Ryan to step outside while they deliberated. He walked out of the room. Security was waiting in the corridor. The deal was paused pending review. And everything that had been built on a dishonest foundation began to come apart. Not with drama. Not with shouting. Quietly, completely, and exactly as it should have. 3 weeks later, I walked into the boardroom for the second time. This time I was the one standing at the front. The contract had been reviewed and corrected over those 3 weeks. The modified liability clauses were returned to their original form. The authorship records were fixed. The lead negotiator field now read what it should have read from the beginning. My name. I presented the Fortis Group partnership in full, the strategy, the client relationship, the terms, the risk framework, with all the context that had always belonged to the complete story. The board asked strong questions. I answered every one of them. The approval came at the end of the meeting. Unanimous. Without hesitation. Ryan was gone by then. His exit had been handled quietly, the way these things usually are. No announcement. No farewell. One day he was there. The next day he wasn't. I thought briefly about what it must feel like to build a career on borrowed foundations, and then watch it collapse because you forgot that foundations keep records. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter. Closer to relief. I gathered my papers. Thanked the board. Walked out into the corridor under my own name, carrying my own work. He thought taking my work would make him successful. But the truth is far simpler than that. The work was always mine. The record was always there. All it needed was one honest moment, and the truth did exactly what it was always going to do.